Somebody get this dirty little street rat out of my bank. Now. A grown man in a $3,000 suit standing in the marble lobby of one of Atlanta's most exclusive banks, pointing his finger at a 9-year-old girl. She was sitting in a waiting chair, holding a deposit envelope, wearing a yellow sundress and sneakers. She wasn't crying. She wasn't making noise. She was just waiting, like any customer would. But he looked at her dark skin, her simple clothes, her little backpack, and his lip curled. Since when do we let strays in here? Next thing you know, she'll be begging my clients for change. He didn't see a customer. He saw a color. What nobody in that building knew was exactly who that little girl was and what was sitting in her bank account. Have you ever watched someone get humiliated in public and then watched karma arrive in real time? Anyway, I won't keep you guys waiting any longer. Let's jump into the story. To understand what happened that day, you need to know where this story really begins. Not in that bank lobby, but in a quiet house in one of Atlanta's oldest money neighborhoods, Tuxedo Park. If you know Atlanta, you know the name. Old oak trees lining every street, iron gates, estates set so far back from the road you can barely see them. This is where Atlanta's wealthiest families have lived for generations. And tucked behind a row of magnolias on a private lane sat the Henderson estate. That morning, sunlight poured through tall windows into a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon oatmeal and fresh coffee. Grace Henderson sat at a long oak table, her feet barely touching the floor. She was 9 years old, small for her age, big brown eyes that noticed everything. A quiet child, not shy, just observant. The kind of kid who listens more than she speaks. Across from her sat her grandmother, Denise Henderson, 71 years old, retired federal judge. The kind of woman who could silence a courtroom with a single look. But right now, she was smiling, stirring honey into her tea, quizzing Grace on her savings goal. How much are you depositing today, baby? $200, Grandma. That puts me at 24 months in a row. And what's the rule? Consistency builds wealth, not luck. Denise smiled. That was Gerald's line. Grace had learned it by heart. Gerald Henderson, Grace's grandfather, wasn't at the table that morning. He was already downtown at the offices of Pinnacle Dynamics, the Fortune 100 tech defense conglomerate he had founded 36 years ago. Gerald Henderson was worth north of $2 billion. Forbes knew his name. Wall Street respected his name. But in this kitchen, he was just Grandpa. Grace had lived with Gerald and Denise for 3 years. Her parents, their only son and his wife, died in a car accident when Grace was 6. The grief almost broke Gerald, but Grace gave him a reason to keep going. And he gave her everything, not in the spoiled sense, but in the structured sense: discipline, education, and financial literacy, starting with a bank account she managed herself. Every month, Grace took her allowance savings to Sterling National Bank's Buckhead branch and made her deposit in person. Gerald insisted on it. He wanted her to understand what it meant to walk into a bank, hand over money, and watch her balance grow. No apps, no shortcuts, face to face. "Can I go by myself today?" Grace asked, pulling on her backpack. Inside, a math workbook, colored pencils, a juice box, and her deposit envelope with 10 crisp $20 bills. Denise hesitated. The branch was 1 block away. The regular manager, a man named Philip who knew the family well, was always there. Grace had done this walk a dozen times. "All right," Denise said. "Straight there, straight back. Tell Mr. Philip I said hello." What Denise didn't know was that Philip wasn't there. He was on vacation in Florida, and the man sitting in his office that Tuesday morning was someone else entirely. Bradley Ashton, 44 years old, white, 15 years in banking, recently transferred from a suburban branch in Marietta to temporarily manage the Buckhead flagship. He had lobbied hard for this assignment. The Buckhead branch was Sterling National's crown jewel: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, mahogany desks, leather chairs. Minimum account balance to walk through the door, $250,000. Bradley loved it. He stood in the lobby that morning, straightening his tie in the reflection of the glass doors. He spoke to the tellers in short, clipped commands. He adjusted the angle of the brochure rack twice. This was his kingdom now, even if only for 2 weeks, and he intended to run it his way. There were 2 tellers on duty. One of them was Tamara Wells, mid-20s, black. She had worked at the branch for 2 years. She was good at her job, warm with clients, sharp with numbers. She also knew when to keep her head down. Working under Bradley, even for a few days, had already taught her that. At 9:15 on a Tuesday morning, the front door opened. A little girl in a yellow sundress walked in. She had a small backpack on her shoulders and a white envelope in her hand. She looked around the grand lobby, the chandelier catching light above her, the polished floor reflecting her sneakers, and she walked to the waiting area. She took a number, sat down, and waited. She had no idea what was coming. Bradley Ashton saw Grace through the glass wall of his office. He was mid-sip on his espresso when his eyes locked onto her. A small black girl, sitting alone in the waiting area of a bank where the cheapest account held $250,000. He set his cup down slowly. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled around the armrest of his chair. He didn't go to her. He didn't ask her a single question. He didn't call the teller to check. Instead, he stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked straight past her to the security station near the entrance, where Officer Dean Sutton sat behind a small desk. Sutton was a thick-necked man in his 50s, white, ex-military, the kind who followed orders without asking why. Bradley leaned down and said, not quietly, not discreetly, but loud enough for the nearest 6 customers to hear, "There's a child in here who clearly doesn't belong, probably wandered off the street. Handle it." He said it the way you'd report a stray dog wandering into a fine restaurant, not with concern, with disgust. Officer Sutton stood up, adjusted his belt, and walked toward Grace. His boots thudded heavy against the marble. Each step echoed through the lobby like a slow drum beat. Grace looked up from her seat. She was holding her deposit envelope flat against her lap with both hands. Her fingers were small against the white paper. "Hey there," Sutton said. His voice wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. Flat, official, practiced. "You can't be in here by yourself. Where are your parents?" "I'm here to make a deposit," Grace said. Her voice was small but steady. She held up the envelope so he could see it. "I have an account here." Sutton looked at the envelope, then back at her face. He hesitated. She wasn't causing trouble. She wasn't touching anything. She wasn't running around. She was sitting in a chair, holding paperwork, like a customer. But Bradley was watching from 10 feet away with his arms crossed and his chin raised, and Sutton could feel those eyes burning into the back of his neck like a heat lamp. "I think you might have the wrong place, sweetheart," Sutton said. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Maybe your mom or dad is waiting outside?" "My grandmother dropped me off. I come here every month. The staff knows me." Before Sutton could respond, Bradley lost patience. He strode over in 4 quick steps. His Italian leather shoes cracked against the marble like a judge's gavel. Sharp, final, absolute. He stopped directly in front of Grace, standing over her, a 6'1" man in a tailored navy suit towering above a 9-year-old girl in a plastic waiting chair. He looked down at her the way you look at something stuck to the bottom of your shoe. "Sweetie," he said. The word dripped with so much contempt it barely sounded like English. "This isn't a playground. This is a private bank for people with actual accounts. Real accounts. Do you understand what that means?" Grace swallowed hard. Her throat bobbed. "Yes, sir. I have an account. My number is—" "You have an account." Bradley repeated it slowly, turning his head towards Sutton with a smirk spreading across his face. He wanted an audience. He wanted someone to share in the joke. Right. Of course you do. He turned back to Grace. His voice dropped to the kind of tone adults use when they think a child is lying and they want to make absolutely sure the lie stings coming back. And I suppose you drove here in your Mercedes too. Two customers in the leather chairs nearby shifted uncomfortably in their seats. An older white woman in a pearl necklace glanced up from her phone screen, her mouth half open as if she might speak. Then she looked away. A man in a gray suit studied the floor with sudden, intense interest. His coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Nobody said a word. The silence in that lobby was thick enough to choke on. It hung in the air like smoke. Grace didn't flinch. She reached into her envelope with steady fingers and pulled out the stack of $20 bills. 10 of them, crisp, neatly counted. She held them up so he could see them clearly. "This is my deposit," she said. $200. I save my allowance every month and I bring it here. For a half second, something flickered across Bradley's face. Not guilt, not shame, just surprise. He hadn't expected her to actually have money. But the surprise lasted exactly 1 second. Then his expression hardened again, like wet concrete setting into its permanent shape, because the money didn't change what he saw when he looked at her. Nothing would. He raised his voice, not shouting, but projecting, the way someone does when they want the entire room to hear every single syllable. "You have an account here? Right. And I'm the Queen of England." He paused, let the line land, held the silence like a comedian waiting for a punchline to hit. A nervous chuckle came from somewhere behind him, short, guilty, quickly swallowed. It was all the encouragement he needed. "Look, I don't know where you came from, but we don't accept food stamps at this branch. This is a real bank for real people with real money." The words hit the lobby like a slap across the face. Tamara Wells, standing behind her teller window 12 feet away, flinched as if she'd been physically struck. Her fingers froze on the keyboard mid-keystroke. She stared at Bradley's back, then at Grace's face. The little girl's eyes were glistening now, not crying, not yet, but the shimmer was there, catching the light from the chandelier above. Her bottom lip pressed tight against her teeth. Her small fingers gripped the stack of 20s so hard the bills wrinkled and bent at the edges. The woman with the pearl necklace looked down at her phone again. The man in the gray suit crossed his legs and turned his body away from the scene entirely. A third customer, a younger man near the water cooler, picked up a brochure and pretended to read it. Not one person in that lobby opened their mouth. Not one. Grace took a slow breath. When she spoke, her voice was quieter now, but she did not look away from Bradley's face. She held his gaze with everything she had. "My name is Grace Henderson. My account number is 8840-5512. I would like to make a deposit, please." She said please like it cost her something precious, like she knew in her bones she shouldn't have to say it. But her grandmother had raised her to be polite, even when the world wasn't polite back, especially then. Bradley didn't blink. He didn't move toward a computer. He didn't write down the number. He didn't even pause to consider it. He simply turned to Officer Sutton and said 2 words, "Get her out." Sutton stepped forward and reached for Grace's arm. Grace pulled back, a small, instinctive flinch, the way any child will react when a stranger's hand comes at them unexpectedly. Her backpack slid off one shoulder and hit the armrest with a soft thud. That's when Tamara Wells spoke up. "Mr. Ashton?" Her voice came from behind the teller glass, careful, controlled, but loud enough to carry across the lobby. "Maybe we should just check the account number. It'll take 2 seconds, just to be sure." Bradley turned slowly. The look he gave Tamara could have frozen a river solid in July. He walked 3 deliberate steps toward her window and placed both hands flat on the marble counter. He leaned in close enough that she could smell his cologne, sharp and expensive. "I don't need a teller telling me how to manage my branch." His voice was low now, almost a whisper, which somehow made it 10 times worse. When I want your opinion, I'll ask for it. Are we clear? Tamara's jaw tightened. A muscle in her cheek twitched. Her eyes dropped to the counter. She said nothing. I said, "Are we clear?" "Yes, sir." Bradley straightened his tie with 2 fingers, smoothed his jacket, turned back toward Grace with that same empty smile, the kind of smile that has absolutely no warmth behind it, just teeth. Now, where were we? The lobby was dead silent. The chandelier above cast tiny fractured rainbows across the cold marble floor. Somewhere outside, a car horn honked and faded. The air conditioning hummed its low, indifferent hum. Inside this building, a 9-year-old girl sat surrounded by adults, educated, wealthy, powerful adults, and not a single one of them was willing to help her. Sit with that for a second, because this is the part of the story that matters most. Not the money, not the twist that's coming later. This part, right here. The part where a room full of grown people watched a child get humiliated, and every single one of them chose silence. Bradley waved his hand at Sutton like he was swatting a fly. I said get her out. I won't ask again. Sutton reached down and took Grace gently but firmly by the arm. Grace stood up from the chair. Her deposit envelope was still clutched in her other hand. Her backpack hung off one shoulder. Her sneakers squeaked softly against the polished marble as Sutton guided her toward the front door. She didn't scream, she didn't fight, she didn't beg. She walked with her chin up and her eyes straight ahead, just the way her grandmother taught her. But if you looked closely, really closely, you could see her hand trembling against the white envelope. She was 9 years old, and she was being escorted out of her own bank like a criminal. Sutton walked Grace toward the glass double doors. His grip on her arm wasn't rough, but it wasn't gentle either. It was the grip of a man following orders he hadn't bothered to question. Grace's sneakers dragged slightly against the marble. The sound was small, barely a whisper, but in that silent lobby, it was the loudest thing in the room. They were 3 steps from the exit when Bradley called out from behind them, "Hold on!" Sutton stopped. Grace stopped. The whole lobby seemed to hold its breath. Bradley walked toward them slowly. His shoes clicked with that same sharp rhythm. He stopped in front of Grace and looked down at her backpack, the small purple bag hanging off her shoulder. His eyes narrowed. "What's in the bag?" Grace looked up at him. "My stuff. School things." "Your stuff." Bradley repeated the words like they tasted bad. He turned to Sutton. "Check it. She's been sitting in here unattended for 10 minutes. She could have taken something from a client's bag, a wallet, a phone. You never know with these kids." These kids. He said it casually, like it was nothing. Like those 2 words didn't carry the weight of every assumption he'd ever made about people who looked like her. Sutton hesitated for 1 full second. 1 second where he could have said no. Could have said, "This isn't protocol." Could have said, "She's 9 years old and she hasn't done anything wrong." But that second passed, and he reached for the backpack. "Can I see your bag, sweetheart?" Grace's eyes went wide, not with guilt, with shock. The kind of shock a child feels when an adult breaks a rule she didn't know could be broken. She looked past Sutton toward the lobby, toward all those seated customers, searching for one face that might object, one adult who might say something. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. She slid the backpack off her shoulder and handed it to Sutton. He unzipped it right there, in the middle of the lobby, in full view of every person in that branch. He reached inside and pulled out the contents one by one, setting each item on the polished counter by the door. A math workbook, 5th grade level. A box of colored pencils, 12 colors, some worn down to nubs. A juice box, apple, unopened, and the deposit envelope, white, sealed, with Grace's handwriting on the front. $200, March deposit. That was it. That was everything this 9-year-old girl was carrying. School supplies and savings. The evidence of a child who studied hard and saved her allowance. Laid out on a bank counter like contraband. Bradley picked up the stack of cash from the envelope. He fanned the $10, $20 bills between his fingers slowly, holding them up to the light as if checking for counterfeits. Then he looked down at Grace with one eyebrow raised. $200? Where did a kid like you get this kind of money? It's my allowance. I save it every month. I told you. Your allowance. Bradley let out a short laugh through his nose. He turned to Sutton. $200 in cash. A kid this age. Walking around alone. No parents. No ID. He shook his head slowly, performing concern the way a bad actor performs grief. You sure you didn't take this from someone's purse, sweetheart? Grace's whole body went rigid. Her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her chin trembled, not from crying, but from the effort of holding it together. The effort of staying polite when every instinct told her to scream. I didn't steal anything. That's my money. I earned it. Bradley placed the cash on the counter and slid it away from her, out of reach. He put one hand on his hip and tilted his head, studying her like she was a problem he hadn't figured out yet. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to wait right here while we verify this money isn't stolen. And depending on what we find, I may need to call the police. The police. He said it deliberately, letting each syllable land like a stone dropped in the still water. He wanted her scared, and it worked. Grace's eyes widened, her breath caught in her chest. For the first time since she walked into that bank, she looked exactly like what she was, a frightened child. Bradley turned and walked back toward his office, satisfied. He had made his point. He had restored order to his kingdom. Behind him, Grace stood frozen near the entrance with Sutton beside her, not free to leave, not allowed to stay. Trapped in a limbo designed by a man who had decided she was guilty the moment he saw her skin. Grace stood near the entrance for several long minutes. Sutton didn't speak to her. He stood with his arms folded, looking at his shoes. The lobby had resumed its quiet hum, keyboards clicking, papers shuffling, as if nothing had happened. As if a child hadn't just been searched and accused of theft in front of a dozen witnesses. Grace's voice came out barely above a whisper. Can I please use a phone? I want to call my grandmother. Sutton glanced toward Bradley's office. The blinds were half closed. Bradley was inside, leaned back in his chair, talking on his phone, laughing about something. His feet were on the desk. I don't think that's going to happen right now, kid. Grace's eyes dropped to the floor. She pressed her lips together tight. The chandelier light caught the shine building in her eyes. She blinked hard. Once. Twice. She would not cry in front of these people. She would not give them that. Across the lobby, Tamara Wells had been watching everything, every word, every moment. She had watched Bradley humiliate this child. She had watched Sutton search her bag. She had watched every customer in that lobby turn away, and she had been told, in no uncertain terms, to mind her own business. But Tamara Wells was not built to watch a child suffer in silence. She waited until Bradley's office blinds turned fully. Then she moved. Quickly. Quietly. She picked up her personal cell phone from beneath the counter, walked to the side of her teller station closest to the entrance, and slid the phone across the marble counter toward Grace. Their eyes met. Tamara didn't say a word. She just gave the smallest nod, barely a movement at all, and turned back to her station. Grace picked up the phone. Her hands were shaking. She dialed the only number she knew by heart. It rang twice. Hello? Grandma. That one word, that single word, broke something open. Grace's voice cracked right down the middle. She pressed the phone hard against her ear and turned her body toward the wall so nobody could see her face. Grace, baby, what's wrong? The manager, he called me homeless. He searched my bag, Grandma. He took my money. He said he's going to call the police on me. He won't let me make my deposit. He won't let me leave either. Silence on the other end. Not the silence of someone thinking. The silence of something cold and ancient waking up. The silence before a storm makes landfall. When Denise Henderson spoke again, her voice had changed completely. The warmth was gone. What replaced it was something Grace had never heard before. Steel wrapped in velvet. Controlled fury pressed into perfect diction. Grace, listen to me carefully. You stay right where you are. Don't say another word to that man. Don't let anyone take that phone from you. We are coming. Do you understand me? Yes, Grandma. We'll be there in 15 minutes. Everything is gonna be all right, baby. The call ended. Grace handed the phone back to Tamara with a whispered, "Thank you." That was barely audible. Then she sat down on the bench near the entrance, placed her empty backpack on her lap, and waited. Okay, I need to pause here for a second. Because this man just searched a 9-year-old girl's backpack, accused her of theft, and threatened to call the police, all because of her skin color. And not one person in that lobby said a single word. That's the part that gets me. Not Bradley, it's the silence. But hold on, because what happens next? Oh, you are not ready for what happens next. 15 minutes passed. Bradley was still in his office, still on the phone, still laughing, his feet still on the desk. He had already forgotten about the girl at the door. She was nothing to him, a minor inconvenience in his morning, already erased from his mind. Grace sat perfectly still on that bench, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the glass doors, waiting, watching. Then the doors opened, and the temperature in that entire building dropped 10 degrees. Gerald Henderson walked in first, 6'2", silver hair, charcoal suit, tailored so precisely it looked painted on. His posture was straight as a knife's edge. His face was carved from granite. No expression, no warmth, nothing to read at all. Behind him, Denise Henderson, cream blazer, pearl earrings, a face set like stone. Behind her, Reginald Davis, the family attorney, leather briefcase in one hand. His expression said everything his mouth didn't need to. Behind him, 2 more people in dark suits, associates, silent, present. 5 people walked into that lobby in a single formation. They moved like they owned the building, because, in a very real sense, they did. Every head in that lobby turned. Every conversation stopped. The air itself seemed to tighten. Tamara Wells looked up from her window, and her hand went to her mouth. Gerald Henderson's eyes swept the room once, found Grace, and in 3 long strides, he was kneeling in front of her, his hands on her shoulders, his forehead pressed against hers. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." Grace finally let the tears fall. Gerald held Grace for a long moment. His large hands cradled the back of her head. His eyes were closed. Denise stood beside them, one hand resting on Grace's shoulder, her jaw clenched so tight the muscles in her neck were visible. Then Gerald stood up. He straightened his jacket with one slow pull. He looked at Denise. She gave him the smallest nod, and Gerald Henderson turned toward the glass office at the back of the lobby and walked straight for it. He didn't knock. The door swung open and hit the wall behind it with a sharp crack. Bradley Ashton nearly fell out of his chair. His feet came off the desk. His phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto the wood. He looked up and saw a tall black man in a charcoal suit standing in his doorway, filling the entire frame. "Can I help you?" Bradley said. His voice came out higher than he intended. He stood up quickly, tugging his jacket straight. "Sir, you need to make an appointment. You can't just walk in here. You're the man who called my granddaughter homeless." It wasn't a question. Gerald's voice was low, controlled, each word placed with the precision of a surgeon's blade. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of the sentence did all the work. Bradley's mouth opened, closed, opened again. His eyes darted past Gerald to the lobby, where Denise was still holding Grace, where Reginald Davis was setting his briefcase on the counter, where two associates in dark suits stood with their hands clasped in front of them like sentinels. There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding. My name is Gerald Henderson. Bradley blinked. You may recognize the name from the building. The color drained from Bradley's face in stages. First his cheeks, then his lips, then his ears. It was like watching someone bleed out in slow motion, except no one was going to call for help. Sterling National Bank's Buckhead flagship branch sat on Henderson Plaza. The land it occupied had been donated to the city's commercial trust by the Henderson Foundation 12 years ago. Gerald Henderson's name was etched into the granite cornerstone outside the front entrance. Bradley had walked past it every morning for 2 weeks without ever once reading it. He was reading it now, in his mind, over and over. Gerald didn't sit down. He stood in the center of Bradley's office and turned his head toward the lobby. Reginald. Reginald Davis stepped forward. He approached Tamara Wells at her teller window and spoke in a calm, professional voice. Pull up account number 88405512, please. Tamara's fingers trembled slightly as she typed. 8 keystrokes. She hit enter. The screen loaded. And Tamara Wells, a woman who processed hundreds of transactions every week, stopped breathing. She turned the monitor slowly so that it faced outward, so that Bradley, who had now followed Gerald to the lobby, could see it clearly. Account holder, Grace A. Henderson. Custodial account, balance, $4,200,000. $4.2 million. Sitting in the account of the 9-year-old girl he had called a stray, the girl whose backpack he had searched for stolen goods, the girl whose $200 in allowance money he had confiscated and mocked. Bradley stared at the screen. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Behind him, the lobby had gone so quiet you could hear the second hand on the wall clock ticking. Every customer, every teller, every person in that building was watching, but that wasn't the real blow. Reginald Davis opened his leather briefcase, removed a single manila folder, and placed it on the counter in front of Bradley. He opened it to the first page and tapped it once with his index finger. Mr. Henderson's family trust holds $85 million in deposits across 6 accounts at this branch. He let the number hang in the air. 85 million. That makes him the single largest depositor in Sterling National Bank's entire Southeast region. Reginald closed the folder, straightened his tie, looked Bradley dead in the eye. And you just told his granddaughter she looked homeless. The silence that followed was devastating. It pressed down on the lobby like a physical weight. Bradley's hand gripped the edge of the counter. His knuckles turned white. A bead of sweat rolled from his temple, down the side of his jaw, and dripped onto his collar. The woman with the pearl necklace had her hand over her mouth. The man in the gray suit was staring at his shoes. The younger man by the water cooler had put down his brochure and was recording on his phone. Nobody tried to stop him. Gerald Henderson stepped forward. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was the quietest sound in that room, and somehow the most deafening. I want every dollar transferred out of this bank, every account, every fund, every trust, today, not tomorrow, not next week, today. He paused, let the weight settle. And I want your regional director in this office within the hour. If she's not here in 60 minutes, my attorney will be filing with the FDIC before lunch. Bradley opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked like a man watching his entire career slide off a cliff in slow motion, reaching for it, grasping at air, catching nothing. Gerald turned his back on him, walked to Grace, took her hand. Come on, baby, we're done here. The power in that room had flipped, completely, permanently, irreversibly. The man who thought he was king of this branch just found out who actually owned the castle. Bradley Ashton's survival instinct kicked in before his dignity did. He came out of that office like a man whose house was on fire, chasing Gerald across the lobby with both hands raised. "Mr. Henderson, please, wait, just wait one moment." Gerald didn't stop. He didn't slow down. He didn't turn around. Bradley circled in front of him, blocking his path. His face was slick with sweat. His tie was crooked. The confident, sneering man from 30 minutes ago had vanished. In his place stood something smaller, something desperate. "Sir, I am so sorry. This was a complete misunderstanding. I had no idea. If I had known who she was..." Gerald stopped. He looked at Bradley with an expression that could strip paint off a wall. "If you had known who she was..." He repeated the words slowly. "That's the problem, Mr. Ashton. You think the way you treated her would have been acceptable if she were someone else's child? Just some ordinary little black girl with no billionaire grandfather?" Bradley's mouth opened. Nothing useful came out. "You searched for a child's backpack, accused her of theft, threatened to call the police on a 9-year-old making a deposit." Gerald's voice never rose above conversational volume. That was what made it terrifying. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's who you are." Gerald turned to Reginald Davis. "Call Lorraine Crawford. If she's not here in 40 minutes, we go to the press first and the regulators second." Reginald already had his phone out. "She's in Atlanta today. I'll have her here in 30. She made it in 28. Lorraine Crawford, Regional Director of Sterling National's Southeast Division, walked through the front doors at 10:14 that morning. 53 years old, silver blonde hair in a tight bun, navy pantsuit. She had been mid-meeting at the downtown office when Reginald's call came in. She left mid-sentence. She read the room in 5 seconds. Gerald Henderson by the window, arms crossed. Denise on the bench, stroking Grace's hair. Bradley alone near his office door, pale as paper, wringing his hands. Reginald at the counter with the folder she instinctively knew would ruin her quarter. She went straight to Gerald. "Mr. Henderson, I want you to know that whatever happened here today does not reflect Sterling National's values. Your values." Gerald let out a breath through his nose, something colder than a laugh. "Your employee called my granddaughter a stray, searched her bag like a criminal, accused her of theft, threatened her with the police. In your building, under your brand. Those are your values, Mrs. Crawford. You just saw them in action." Lorraine's jaw tightened. She was corporate enough to know this battle couldn't be won with words. The damage was catastrophic. She turned to Bradley. "Mr. Ashton, you are suspended, effective immediately, pending a full internal investigation. Surrender your badge and keys to Officer Sutton and leave the premises." Bradley's face crumbled. "Mrs. Crawford, you can't be serious. I was protecting the branch. I was following protocol." "There is no protocol that instructs you to humiliate a child. Badge and keys, now." Sutton stepped forward. The same Officer Sutton who had searched Grace's backpack. The same man who had gripped her arm and walked her toward the door. Now he stood in front of Bradley with his hand extended, waiting. Bradley unclipped his badge with shaking fingers, placed it in Sutton's palm along with a ring of keys. The metal clinked softly in the silent lobby. Sutton gestured toward the exit. "This way, Mr. Ashton." Bradley walked through that lobby one last time, past the leather chairs, past the mahogany desks, past the chandelier he had admired every morning for 2 weeks, past the customers who wouldn't look at him now, and past Grace. She was sitting on the bench beside her grandmother. Her eyes were dry. She looked up as Bradley passed. She didn't speak. She didn't smirk. She didn't need to. She just watched him walk out the same door he had tried to push her through 30 minutes earlier. Sometimes silence is the loudest statement a person can make. The glass doors closed behind him, and Bradley Ashton was gone. Before leaving, Gerald paused at Tamara Wells' window. Tamara looked up, her eyes still red. Gerald placed one hand on the counter and spoke quietly, just for her. "You were the only person in this building who tried to help my granddaughter. I won't forget that." Tamara's chin trembled. She pressed her lips together and nodded. No words, just a nod. But it carried the weight of everything she had risked that morning. Her job, her standing, her safety. For a little girl she barely knew. Gerald held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he turned, took Grace's hand, and walked out into the Atlanta sunlight. The story should have ended there. A powerful family walks in, the bully gets fired, justice is served. Roll credits. But that's not how this one played out. Because what happened inside that bank didn't stay inside that bank. Remember the younger man near the water cooler? The one who picked up his phone and started recording when Gerald revealed who he was? He captured almost 4 minutes of footage. Bradley's face when the account balance appeared, Gerald's quiet devastation, Grace sitting on that bench with tears drying on her cheeks, Sutton taking Bradley's badge, all of it. He posted the video that evening with one line of caption. This banker called a 9-year-old black girl a stray. She had $4.2 million in her account. By midnight, it had 600,000 views. By the next morning, it had crossed 4 million. By 48 hours, the hashtag Justice for Grace was trending in every state in the country. The comment section became a war zone. Thousands of people sharing their own stories of being profiled in banks, in stores, in restaurants. Black mothers describing the moment they had to explain to their children why someone treated them differently. The rage was not just about Grace. Grace had become a mirror, and America didn't like what it saw looking back. Patricia Moore, a national news anchor, picked up the story on day 2. Her segment opened with the lobby footage and a single question on screen. Who decides who belongs? The segment ran for 11 minutes. It was the most watched clip on the network's website that week. Patricia interviewed Gerald Henderson via satellite. He sat in his study at home, calm and measured, and said something that became the defining quote of the entire story. "My granddaughter had $4 million in her account, and they treated her like a criminal. Imagine what they do to children who don't." That sentence was printed on protest signs within 24 hours. While the public storm raged, the legal machinery began to turn, on 3 separate tracks, simultaneously. Track 1, Sterling National Bank's internal investigation. The bank formed a review committee within 72 hours of the incident. What they found made the situation significantly worse. Bradley Ashton had 2 prior complaints on file from his previous branch in Marietta. Both were filed by clients of color. One described Bradley refusing to process a wire transfer for a black businessman, insisting on additional verification that was never required of white clients. The second described Bradley making a comment to a colleague about a Hispanic family, something about people who should stick to check cash in stores. Both complaints had been reviewed by Bradley's former branch manager and quietly buried. No action taken, no follow-up, no record in his transfer file. The review committee's report described a pattern of discriminatory conduct enabled by systemic failures in internal oversight. That report was leaked to Patricia Moore's network within a week. Track 2, Regulatory Action. Reginald Davis filed formal complaints with both the FDIC and the Georgia Department of Banking and Finance. The FDIC opened a preliminary inquiry into Sterling National's complaint handling procedures. The Georgia Department launched a broader regulatory review of the bank's customer treatment policies across all branches in the state. Inspectors arrived at the Buckhead branch within 10 days. They interviewed staff. They reviewed security footage. They pulled transaction records. The bank's legal team went into full crisis mode. Emergency board meetings were called. Outside counsel was retained. The phrase reputational exposure appeared in 17 internal emails in a single week. Track 3, the civil lawsuit. Reginald Davis filed suit on behalf of Grace Henderson in Fulton County Superior Court. The complaint named both Bradley Ashton personally and Sterling National Bank as defendants. The charges: racial discrimination in public accommodation, unlawful detention of a minor, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of Georgia's Fair Business Practices Act. The lawsuit was not about money. The Hendersons didn't need money. It was about precedent, about making the cost of racism so steep that institutions would think twice before looking the other way. The fallout hit Bradley Ashton like a freight train with no brakes. Sterling National terminated him within 1 week of suspension. No severance package, no letter of recommendation, no quiet resignation with a handshake. Fired. Effective immediately. His 15-year banking career ended in a single phone call from Human Resources on a Wednesday afternoon. His banking license was flagged for regulatory review. If the review board ruled against him, he would be permanently barred from working in any financial institution in the United States. Permanently. The civil lawsuit named him as an individual defendant. Sterling National, scrambling to distance itself from liability, refused to cover his legal costs. Bradley had to hire his own attorney. With no income and mounting legal bills, he burned through his savings in 3 months. Then the internet found his social media, old posts, careless posts, jokes about certain neighborhoods, a shared article about welfare with a laughing emoji, a comment under a news story about immigration that used language no employer would tolerate. Screenshots spread across every platform within hours. They were entered into evidence as proof of a documented pattern of racial bias. His wife filed for legal separation 6 weeks after the video went viral. She cited irreconcilable differences. But everyone who knew them understood the real reason. She couldn't walk into a grocery store without being recognized as the wife of the man who called a 9-year-old girl a stray. Sterling National Bank paid its own price. Gerald Henderson transferred $85 million in assets to Covenant Financial Group, a black-owned bank headquartered in Atlanta. He made the transfer public. He held a press conference. He stood at a podium with Grace beside him and said, "We are taking our business to an institution that sees our granddaughter as a customer, not a suspect." Sterling's stock dipped 3% that week. Several other high net worth clients quietly closed their accounts. The bank was forced to implement mandatory bias training for all employees, revise its customer interaction policies nationwide, and establish an independent oversight committee to review discrimination complaints. The civil case settled 6 months later. Bradley Ashton paid a personal settlement, the amount undisclosed, but described by sources close to the case as substantial enough to ensure he remembers. Sterling National Bank paid $2.5 million into a newly created fund, the Grace Henderson Financial Literacy Foundation, providing banking education and savings programs to underserved youth across Georgia. Bradley was ordered to complete 500 hours of community service with a racial equity organization. The judge in the case, issuing her final ruling, called Bradley's conduct egregious, indefensible, and representative of a prejudice that this court refuses to normalize. No open endings, no ambiguity, no slap on the wrist, full consequences. Every single one of them earned. So where are they now? Let me tell you, because the ending of this story matters just as much as the beginning. Grace Henderson turned 10 last spring. She still makes a monthly deposit. Same routine, same discipline, same envelope. But now she walks into Covenant Financial Group, where the staff greets her by name the moment she steps through the door. The branch manager keeps a bowl of butterscotch candies on her desk just for Grace. Grace started a savings club at her school. 14 kids meet every Wednesday after class. She teaches them how to count their money, set goals, and track deposits in a little notebook, the same way her grandfather taught her. When her teacher asked what she wants to be when she grows up, Grace didn't say doctor, didn't say lawyer. She looked her teacher straight in the eye and said, "I want to own a bank." She's 10, and I believe her. General and Denise Henderson expanded the Henderson Foundation's mission after the incident. They launched a new initiative focused on financial access for underserved communities, free banking workshops, youth savings match programs, and partnerships with 12 black-owned credit unions across the Southeast. Gerald gave a keynote at the National Banking Conference that fall. The title, The Cost of Assumptions. It received a standing ovation that lasted 2 full minutes. Denise returned to public life briefly. She testified before a Georgia State Legislative Committee examining racial bias in financial services. Her testimony was 11 minutes long. She did not raise her voice once. 3 committee members were in tears by the end. Tamara Wells. This is the one that gets me. She was the only person in that lobby who tried to help Grace. The only one who spoke up. The only one who risked her job to slide a phone across a counter to a frightened child. Gerald kept his word. He personally called the CEO of Covenant Financial Group and recommended Tamara for their management training program. She was accepted within a month. 18 months later, Tamara Wells was promoted to assistant branch manager at Covenant's main Atlanta location. The one person who stood up was the one who rose. Remember that. Officer Dean Sutton resigned from Sterling National's security team 3 weeks after the incident. He issued a public apology to the Henderson family. In it, he wrote one line that stuck with me. I followed an order I knew was wrong, and a child paid the price for my cowardice. He enrolled in a social work program at Georgia State. He is still completing his degree. And Bradley Ashton, the man who started all of this, he lost his career, his marriage, his reputation, his savings. He works a quiet administrative job now where nobody knows his face. He is still completing his 500 hours of community service. His name appears in compliance training modules at 3 major banks as a case study in what happens when bias goes unchecked. He will never work in banking again. Here's what I want you to walk away with. It shouldn't take a $4 million bank balance to be treated with dignity. Grace got her justice because her family had power. But what about the kids who don't? What about the 9-year-olds who get turned away, searched, humiliated, and there's no Gerald Henderson walking through the door? That's why stories like this matter. Not because the powerful got revenge, but because they shine a light on a system that lets this happen in the first place. Okay. Wait a second. The story itself? Yeah, that part was fiction. But what Grace felt? The humiliation. The way people assume the worst. That part is real. These things happen to black children in places they belong. So the question isn't, does this happen? The real question is, what do we do when we see it? If you want more stories like this, stories where justice actually gets served, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because the more we talk about this, the harder it becomes to ignore. Remember, respect isn't something you earn with a bank balance. It's something every human being is born with. The only question is whether the people around you choose to see it. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and never, ever stay silent.